So, very welcome to the last afternoon of the 33rd Annual Conference of Academia Europaea. We have in front of us a very nice program for this afternoon, including the awarding of 3 prizes. The 2021 Erasmus medal to Philippe Aghion, and then the 2022 Andreu Young Academia Europaea Prize for Sciences and Policy to Gergely Toldi, and then the 2022 Academia Europaea Gold Award 2022 to Seared Clothing. And then later on tonight in the City Hall, there will also be the Barcelona Hypatia European Science Prize given to Nancy Cartwright. So, in addition, we will have scientific presentations by Kirsten Drotner and Jean-Marie Tarascon. So I am very much looking forward to this. And the first item on our agenda is the 2021 Erasmus medal. Let me first give a little bit of information about this medal. So the medal was established in 1992. It's a non-monetary award that is made to a scholar who, in the judgment of their peers, has maintained excellence over a sustained period, undertaking the highest level of internationally recognized scientific scholarship in Europe. The Board of Trustees of Academia Europaea grants the award on the recommendation of an expert disciplinary search committee. The award follows a rigorous peer review process. All fields are covered in a 4-yearly cycle of rotation, matching the 4 classes of the Academy. The medalist is invited to receive the medal and citation at an annual conference of members and is invited to deliver an Erasmus lecture during the meeting. So on behalf of the trustees, I am honored to invite Professor Andreu Mas-Colell, an internationally recognized economist, scholar, and a former recipient of the Erasmus medal, and sometime trustee of the Academia Europaea, to give the laudation. Andreu, please. Anyone seen Andreu? Andreu is on his way. No hurry, Andreu. Floor is yours.
I thought the other was on first. My apologies. Dear colleagues, it's for me an honor and a pleasure to be introducing Philippe Aghion. Philippe Aghion is an economic theorist. He's French and was groomed at the École Normale Supérieure. After obtaining a doctorate in mathematical economics in France, he made his way to Harvard for a PhD in economics, which he got in 1987. Following a short period as assistant professor at MIT, he returned to Europe, where he pursued an academic career at the CNRS, Oxford, and UCL. In 2001, the European Economic Association awarded him the Jo Johansson Award as the best European economist under age 45. Around that time, in 2000, he crossed the ocean again and became professor of economics at Harvard. It was a loss for European-based economics, although he kept very present, especially as invited professor at the Institute of International Economic Studies in Stockholm. In 2015, we were fortunate enough and the roles of Europe and the US reversed once again. While still visiting Harvard often, he recrossed the ocean and resettled in Europe at the LSE as Centennial Professor and at the Collège de France in a chair entitled Institutions, Innovation et Croissance. In 2020, he became a professor at INSEAD Paris. I do not exaggerate if I say that with this rearrangement of his center of gravity, there was a perceptible effect on the general level and impact of European-based economics. In 2016-17, he was president of the European Economic Association. As a theorist, Aghion has been versatile. He has contributed to the understanding of the logic of contracts, of economies in transition from planned to market-oriented, to the economics of banking and finance institutions, you name it. It is a corpus of work that by itself would justify his presence today among us, and that should not be obscured by the fact that his most far-reaching accomplishment and what has put him in a class of its own has been his contribution to the development of the economics of innovation, and his success in placing it in a central road for the understanding of the dynamics of present-day capitalism. He has done so by reviving, in a rigorous and consistent way, the ideas of Joseph Schumpeter about creative destruction as the engine of economic progress. This he did initially in collaboration with Peter Hobbit, then at the University of Western Ontario. For this research, Aghion and Hobbit received in 2020 the BBVA Frontiers of Knowledge Awards in Economics, Finance and Management, and I quote from the award statement the reasons why, quote, for their fundamental contribution to the study of innovation, technical change and competition policy. In their joint writing, they revive, develop in the framework of modern economic theory and validate empirically Schumpeter's idea that innovation is a process of creative destruction. The seminal contribution in this literature is a model of growth through creative destruction, published in Econometrica in 1992. This article provides a new theoretical framework, which is the basis for important positive and normative new insights. It identifies policies that can increase or decrease innovation and growth, and the conditions under which innovation and growth can be either suboptimally too high or too low. The Neo-Schumpetian framework has proved a powerful tool for a variety of applications, some of them developed by Aghion and Hobbit themselves. In one, they link innovation to the process of job creation and job destruction in a model of labor market research friction. In another, they study the relationship between product market competition and innovation, which they find to be ham-shaped, with both very high and very low competition determining innovation. The splendid vision of Schumpeter, presented in 1942 in the book, end of quote. The splendid vision of Schumpeter, presented in 1942 in the book Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy, caught the imagination, but not the analytical work of economists. It was understood that the book was important and had to be read, but economics advances by the formulation of consistent and tractable models, and not just any model. They have to be models recognizable as evolutions of the current state of the art, often small, sometimes large enough to be called revolutions. Schumpeter's vision was at such distance from the theory of his day that this did not happen immediately, and his work was consigned to a visible but secondary and isolated shelf. Quite different from Keynes and his 1936 treaty, The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. Again, a disruptive vision that this time was transformed in a few years into a workable analytical model by several hands, most notably John Hicks at Oxford. Let me describe a storyline that connects Schumpeter's vision and the state-of-the-art of economic theories in the 40s with an evolution of research that culminates in the 90s in the hands of Aghion and his co-authors, with a massive analytical and empirical work that succeeds in incorporating Schumpeter's vision into the mainstream of economics. I could begin the story with Keynes. His 1936 general theory established the foundation of macroeconomics. In the middle of the Great Depression, he has a sense of urgency. In the long run, we are all dead, is one of his famous quips. The challenge was to guarantee that the economy uses fully its resources, in particular the workforce, that is, full employment. The Keynesians gave a solid doctrinal basis to something that empirically was being validated by the practice of many governments, namely that government could have, especially through fiscal policy, a very large role in securing full employment in the short run. From here, it was natural to ask, what about the medium or the long run? The logical macro question to concentrate was economic growth and the forces that drive it. This is a question that resonates with Schumpeter, but the theoretical developments were not yet ready for establishing a link. In the first instance, the analysis focused on the determinants of the growth of the factor of production, say capital and labor. Those are fixed in Keynes' short run. The analytical breakthrough came in the mid-50s with the work of Robert Solow and others. Solow formulated a simple and very tractable model of economic growth. Population, he assumed to be exogenous, and the dynamics of capital accumulation was determined by the saving rate of the population saving going into investment. The result was a prediction of a long-run level of GDP per capita towards which the economy will converge. Of course, this level depended on the state of technical knowledge of science. It was understood, therefore, that since there is technical progress, the long-run level will be a moving target. But Solow did something that methodologically has become the gold standard for the study of economic growth. He put his model to the empirical test. A surprising conclusion emerged. Most economic growth was explained not by population growth or capital accumulation, but by technical progress. It was paradoxical that this was discovered in the context of models that were designed to study capital accumulation and treated technical change, if at all, as an exogenous trend variables. Because of the specifics of the empirical treatment, the portion of growth not explained by labor growth or capital accumulation came to be denoted as the residual, an unsatisfactory state of affairs indeed. The next logical step was to think of technical knowledge as yet another factor of production, subject as any other, including, by the way, population growth, to economic decisions, in particular on the direction and the volume of research. This came to be known as endogenous growth theory. The theory recognized that the injection of knowledge into the economy implied the emergence of new things, yet it did not make the link to Schumpeter's idea of creative destruction. This was done by Aghion and Hobbit in the 1992 article. The new theory has been enormously fertile. I want to emphasize that the merit of Aghion's work is not simply that he managed to formulate a consistent and tractable model of Schumpeter's ideas, but that once in possession of the analytical tool, he proceeded to show that indeed Schumpeter was right in thinking on creative destruction as a key concept for the understanding of modern capitalism. He has done so by showing the power of the concept for a large variety of economic issues, from the virtues of lack of them of competition to the future of capitalism, passing through green innovation and sustainable growth, of health and happiness. All these are titles of chapters of The Power of Creative Destruction, a tour de force written with the help of Céline Antonin and Simone Bunel that gathers 5 years of teaching at the Collège de France. Although well socialized in the academic ivory towers of this world, Aghion is not an ivory tower economist. He is extremely civic-minded. He is very present in the public agora. His voice has been heard at election times, and he has participated in many policy commissions in France, Europe, and the world. For example, in 2021, he has been appointed to the World Bank International Monetary Fund High-Level Advisory Group on Sustainable and Inclusive Recovery and Growth. Most important and decisive is the fact that the central nerve of his research aims for a momentous conclusion. Keynes argued that in order to guarantee full employment at any moment, a certain type of public policy interventions in market had to be accepted. In that way, a liberal intellectual set the basis for the macroeconomic public management of the capitalist economy. One could say that Aghion, coming more from the socialist than the liberal end, is engaging in a parallel quest for the long-run viability of an economy both prosperous and fair. We should accept that competition is the engine of innovation and in the last resort of prosperity, but the need for it to be managed should also be accepted without regrets. In final words of the power of creative destruction, capitalism is a spirited horse. It takes off readily, escaping control, but if we hold its reins firmly, it goes where we wish. Philippe, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you very much, Andreu. I now call upon Professor Aghion to come to the stage and receive his Erasmus medal. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. And now we are very much looking forward to listening to Professor Aghion's 2022 Heinz Nixdorf Erasmus lecture, The Promise of the Creative Destruction Paradigm. Please.
Thank you very much. So thanks so much. It's a fantastic honor and very humbling, and to have Andreu, who was my thesis advisor in Harvard, to deliver the introductory speech, and so that's it means a lot to me today. Hard to express everything I feel. I call this the promise of the creative destruction paradigm, and in half an hour I will try to convey a little bit what it's all about. But already Andreu has done a marvelous presentation of what we try to accomplish, and so I will probably repeat a lot of what Andreu has said. Oh, so it has to be close to the microphone. Okay. That's the thing. Yeah, because usually I'm a quantic object. I move. Yeah. Very hard to keep me still, but I will make a big effort so here is a photograph of young Schumpeter, and so creative destruction was a term introduced by Schumpeter and in various writings, in particular in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, to coin the process whereby new innovation displace old technologies. New innovations make old technology. Oh, that's much better. Yeah, that's. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, can be. That's. But as Andreu pointed out, there was no. When I studied economics, there was no such thing as a Schumpeterian model of economic growth. There was no empirics based on this idea. Okay, so the state of the art at the time was the Solow model. Bob Solow was a colleague, my colleague at MIT when the 2 years I spent there, and it's been very encouraging for what we did. But Bob Solow got the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1987 for a paper written in 1956, which was my birth year, called A Contribution to the Theory of Economic Growth. And what Solow did was to lay out a very simple model revolving around two equations, whereby growth would result from capital accumulation. But on the reasonable assumptions of decreasing returns to capital accumulation, it means that the increase in output from 0 to 1 machine is much bigger than the increase in output from 9 machines to 10 machines, okay? So on the reasonable assumptions, in fact, you cannot keep growing just by saving and investing in capital accumulation. If you just rely on capital accumulation, you run out of steam. So what Solow did was to develop this very elegant model to show that on the reasonable assumptions, you could not keep growing forever just based on capital accumulation. You needed something else, and the something else was what he called technical progress. But as Andreu explained very well, there was Solo would not tell you where technical progress would come from. Okay, but on the other hand, we knew, you know, I have heard about creative destruction, and I said, where is the model? But there was no model. So what happened is then, when I arrived at MIT in 1987, I was first-year assistant professor, and Peter Howitt was visiting for 1 year from Western Ontario. He was my neighbor, and I came. We used to talk a lot, you know, and then I said, well, Peter, why don't we try to, from scratch, to write a model that would embody creative destruction, okay? And so what we did with Howitt is to lay out a model that would embody the following 3 ideas. I need to drink water, you know, as I'm a bit, I get dehydrated. I want to make sure, voilà. Okay. So the model would revolve around 3 main ideas. The first idea is that, you know, long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation, where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. Okay? You always stand on giant shoulders. Okay? That's the first idea. The second idea is that innovation largely results from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospect of innovation rents. When you innovate, you get rents forever because you have a better product, or you find a cheaper way to produce, and that gives you a hedge over potential rivals, and that gives you some rents for a while. Okay? And it's the prospect of these rents that make you want to innovate, because if I innovate, I will get the jackpot and I will get those rents. Okay? So that's the second idea. The third idea is creative destruction. You know, new innovations make old technologies obsolete. The new replaces the old. Okay? And you can see right away that what makes this theory interesting is that at the heart of the paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need innovation rents to motivate innovators. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are very tempted to use those rents to prevent subsequent innovation. They don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating capitalism is just all about how to manage this contradiction. You need to provide some rents, but you don't want yesterday's innovators to use these rents to prevent subsequent innovators. Okay? So whether we talk about secular stagnation, about middle income trap, about inequality, but we always come across this contradiction. And that's what's not in any other growth model before. Okay? And Schumpeter himself was pessimistic about capitalism because he thought that the first innovators would turn into entrenched incumbents that would successfully bribe governments and prevent subsequent entry. I am more like a Gramscian optimist. I think that there are forces that can allow you to avert, although there is a lot of truth, and we will see that there is a lot of ground in economic history to support Schumpeter's pessimism, yet there are forces that can be activated to avert his pessimistic prediction. Okay? So I will get to that little by little. Are you still alive? I'm not killed, not yet dead. I always say that, you know. Voilà. So why is this paradigm changes the landscape compared to any previous growth model? Because first, it gives center stage to firm dynamics and to cross-firm heterogeneity. It's all about the dichotomy between entrants and incumbents, the dichotomy between leaders and followers in a sector, the dichotomy between small firms and large firms. And this theory, which is very based on the firm dynamics and firms, lends itself to a new kind of econometrics. In fact, the way to do it is a permanent dialogue between theory and empirics, but the empirics is a microeconometrics, which is very much firm-level econometrics. Before, people used to do capital accumulation models using very macro regressions. Now you don't do that anymore. This is dead. This is finished. Now the way to do growth is to have micro-founded model, which you all the time, go back and forth with microeconometrics, very much firm-level microeconometrics. Okay, so it's really revolutionary. Okay, so let me talk about first 2 distinctive predictions of the theory. Are you still there? Still there? Whoa, fantastic. Okay. So the first one is that growth is positively correlated with turnover. Of course, because growth is driven by creative destruction. Creative destruction means that there is an entry and an exit. And indeed, if you have an index on the horizontal axis, a measure of firm creation, firm destruction, cross European countries panel or cross US state panel or wherever you want to do, and on the vertical axis you have the growth per capita GDP growth, you will find a positive correlation between the two. Wherever there is more creative destruction, there is more growth, okay? That's already an important prediction. Another important thing to know is that that's the exit rate of firms in France or in the US. Young firms, which are also small firms, they tend to exit more. And the older firms tend to exit less. That's very easy to understand. If you enter with one activity. I enter, for example, because I do better than you do on one activity. So I become a one activity firm. Then I try to grow and do more activities by, again, doing better than other people. Of course, I can shrink. If someone does better than me on one activity, I will shrink. But I grow by improving upon various activities. Okay? So if I am a young, small firm, I have only one activity. It takes only one creative destruction to get rid of me. If I have already aged and grown, it will take more than one creative destruction to get rid of me. So you see right away that this explains easily why younger firms, you have an exit rate bigger than for older firms. And it also explains why you have a positive relationship between the age of a firm and the size of a firm, measured by number of employees or number of activities. You start small, and then you grow unless you are replaced and you die first. It's very interesting. You can see that this slope is much steeper in the US. Why? Because in the US, when you are good, you can get finance. Elga, you mentioned finance yesterday. That's where you are. In the US, when you are good, you get the financing. Basic research, venture capital, institutional investors, DARPA, BARDA, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you get all the finance. You can grow more. But also, it's also because if you are not that good, you are eliminated more easily by people who can grow. And so if you manage to survive, is that you are also a very high growth potential who can grow more. And you can see why they have a steeper curve relating age and growth. And the very dynamic economies is where this curve is very steep. That's something you don't have at all in previous growth theories. You see, they just don't make sense at all of this. It's just amazing. That, voilà. Anyway, nothing. Okay, so the second prediction. So one reason also why you grow more in the US is because you face more competition. You have more entry and exit, and they force you to innovate in order to survive. And that gets me to the second prediction, is that more intense competition enhances innovation in frontier firms and discourages it in non-frontier firms. So I always I will do the same as yesterday. You are a class, you are all fantastically good and equally good. But suppose some of you are the top of the class and some of you are the bottom of the class. And now I open the door and a very good colleague enters. And what will happen? Those who are at the top of the class, they will work harder to remain the first of the class. Those who were behind, they were already a bit discouraged. They will be even more discouraged. It's true in classrooms. It's true in firms. You see here the blue curve are firms in their sector that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. They are the first of the class in their sector. The orange curve are firms that are laggards. You see that the firms that are good in their sectors, they react positively to competition. Competition induces them to innovate more and grow more in order to remain the best. Those who are behind tend to lag behind. And the more developed a country is, the more blue firms it has to compare to orange firms. So that tells you right away that the more developed a country is, the higher the fraction of blue firms, and therefore the more growth enhancing it is to have more competition. Tighter competition policy. Okay, so those are already two predictions. Are you still alive now? Are you still there? Oh, fantastic. I've done the hardest part, okay? Now it's just harvesting. You've been fantastic, because really this was the hardest. Now that you've done that, I would like also to say, well, so using the lens of this model, in addition to predictions, I can do two things. I can revisit some main enigma in economic history, and I can rethink the future of capitalism. Only this, okay? So let me do that without falling. That's the biggest, because today you saw a very scholar and serious presentation by Andreu. I remember the presentation at the Schumpeter lecture. There was the Andreu with the tell me, you know, how I bon. Alors the part 2, some historical enigma. So the first one is secular stagnation. Very interestingly, if you look at the average yearly rate of TFP growth, of productivity growth, you see that in the US, the productivity growth increased between 1995 and 2005, but then declined a lot since then. And the enigma is how come you had this decline in productivity growth despite the IT revolution and the AI revolution? How come? So we entertain various stories, but the most plausible one is that thanks to the IT revolution, you had the emergence of superstar firms. We call them the GAFAM in France, or the FAMANG, Microsoft, Google, Walmart, Amazon, Facebook, etc. Those firms took advantage of the IT revolution to expand, and they were more productive. And because they were more productive, during their expansion, they boosted growth in the US. But then what happened is once they expanded through merger and acquisition everywhere, they discouraged non-superstar firms from doing innovation and entry. And then we get to the Schumpeter pessimism, you see? And you can see that because you see the rate of entry of new firms declines since the 2000s. Okay, so the problem there was that you could say, well, Schumpeter was right, there is nothing to do. Of my colleague Bob Gordon. But in fact, you could say, no, there is something you could do in the US, is to change competition policy. In the US, they would allow anybody to do merger and acquisition without any limit. Maybe now, when you do competition policy, that's also true, by the way, for the European competition policy. I think, although they do lots of good things, and I don't want at all to criticize them, but one thing they could improve is that when we decide whether or not to allow for merger and acquisition, we only look at market share, market definition. We don't look at the effect of a merger on subsequent entry and subsequent innovation. So, if suppose you do that, and in fact, the US last year, under the Biden administration, introduced big reforms of competition policy, the hope is that those reforms would revert that trend and would allow for, again, entry of more innovative firms and reverse this decline in productivity growth, okay? But you see, that's my Gramscian optimism. The pessimism says there is nothing to do. And the optimism says, no, you can change competition policy. You can act, you can do things, okay? Second one is the middle income trap. So you look at, for example, Korea. Korea had very high growth rate of per capita GDP post-Korean War, the South Korea. And they grew mainly by catching up, by imitating frontier technologies, okay? And so they start to grow fast. But you can see that the rate of growth declined. And what happened is that, you see, during the catching up phase in Korea, you had the growth of conglomerate firms called the chaebols. And the chaebols, not only they discouraged new entry, but they also put pressure on the Korean government to not adopt more competition and more openness. And that's why they became like big elephants that blocked not only entry, but also pro-competition policies. But what's very interesting in Korea is that, and of course, given that Korea was moving closer to the technological frontier, they should have moved to more and more pro-competition because they were having more and more blue firms compared to orange firms. But what's very interesting in Korea is that at the end of the 90s, they experienced a financial crisis. And the crisis had a good side to it. It weakened the power of the chaebols. It allowed, therefore, for more entry of innovation firms. And it forced the Korean government to accept the move towards more openness and more competition. And that explains this surge of growth in Korea in the early 2000s. It's interesting, yeah? There the crisis played a role, okay? So there can be sometimes a good thing to a crisis, okay? Okay, so that's the first. Alors now I get to the last part, rethink capitalism. Okay, so we learned from COVID that US is not a dream social model. Let's face it. I mean, maybe some of you are. It's not our. But you can do better. And Europe is not the best innovation model yet. We are getting there. I mean, with all what I've heard here, I'm more optimistic, okay, that simulates my Gramscian optimism with the last 2 days. If you look at here I'm looking at the evolution of employment and health insurance. In the US, those are the gray curves, and in Germany, those are the black curves. The triangles are the share of population without a job, and the circles are the share of population without health insurance. In the US, the share of unemployed increased during COVID at the first. And because when you lose your job, you have a probability of using your health insurance, it also increased at the time where everybody needed health insurance. The share of US citizens without health insurance went up during the crisis. You see what I mean? And it had gone down before because of the Obamacare. You see the beauty of the Obamacare? That's, you see, it exists. When some people say Obamacare made no difference, it's absolutely wrong. Here is the difference made by Obamacare, okay? So, but in Germany, everybody gets health insurance throughout. I could put Spain, I could put Sweden, I can put France. It would be like Germany. Okay, so, and if I had put the share of individual at the risk of poverty instead of the share of individuals without health insurance, I would get exactly the same comparison between US on the one hand and continental Europe in the other hand. Okay, so on social grounds, they are not great, the US, okay? And if you look at things like the Gini is an index of global inequality. It's an index of how globally you depart from perfect equality. You can see that US has the bigger the Gini. When you have a Gini of 0, everybody it's equal. Everybody earns the same. When you have a Gini of 1, you are the most unequal. So it's a measure that goes from 0 to 1, and the higher it is, the more unequal you are. The US are more unequal than Germany, Sweden, Norway, France, Denmark. I could put Spain. That's it. And on poverty rate, again, US is above, way above any of us, okay? So those are on the social ground. So that's the downside of the US system, okay? There is another downside, I will get back to it in a moment, is this. This is very important because we talk about life expectancy a lot, and we got very late figures that life expectancy is dramatically dropping in the US. But this was work from Anne Case and Angus Deaton, and it shows the mortality rate of white non-Hispanics, middle-aged, unskilled. So middle-aged between 50 and 54. And you can see that in the US, since the 2000, the rate of death, the mortality rate has increased a lot. And that's what they call death of despair. Those are people who are afraid of losing their job or who lose their job. We know already that if they lose their job, they have a probability to fall into poverty and to lose health insurance. And they lose status. They have family dislocating. So you are always under stress in the US. And that's why you take opioids, sleeping pills, antidepressants. You start eating lots of pizza. I love pizza, but they eat pizza all the time, you know. And that's not good, quoi. And that increases mortality. Okay, so whereas not the same in France, Spain would be like France, and UK is so-so, quoi. They still have to choose whether they are, US model or continental Europe. It's amazing, no? It's exactly what you would have guessed. Okay, so that's on the social ground. But of course, on the other hand, the US is much better on innovation. Here I show the flow of triadic patents per million inhabitants. Triadic patents are patents that are registered in the US Patent Office, the Japanese Patent Office, and the European Patent. They are the good. All patents are good, but that's one way to measure significant patents. You can have very good patents that are not triadic, okay? You have other measures. I can take many other measures. But you see the US dominates the EU 27 average and China still. Okay, and I can show many measures. If I can show flow of patents, top 5% cited patents on any measure, the US dominates still by a large margin. And why is that? Because the US, as we said yesterday, has an ecosystem of innovation which is better than Europe. Basic research. Now we have the ERC. Thanks God we have the ERC. I could not operate in France without ERC. I would just be there, going to museums and eating cheese. If I can do something else in France, it's because of ERC, quoi. Really. That's great already. I mean, you learn a lot. So that's great. ERC is a fantastic thing. Okay, so thank you, Helga, thank you, Andreu, thanks for all of those. But in the US, they have the NSF, which was the model for ERC. They have the NIH, the National Institute of Health. They have also sponsors institutions like the Howard Hughes Medical Investigator, which is a big deal that finances very long-term research and bets on researchers and allows them to take lots of risk. They take more risk and they do bigger innovation because they know that on long term, even if they fail in the short run, it's guaranteed they can continue. That's HHMI had a big impact. I can show you the impact of HHMI has been very important, complementary to NIH and NSF. We don't have such things in Europe, as far as I know, not much, not enough. Okay, so that's for basic research. But then when you go from basic research to startup, they have venture capital more developed than we have. Then when you go to become a bigger firm, you do an IPO, you become a public company, and you need to do innovation. Institutional investors, pension funds, mutual funds also play a big role in the US. And then you have the DARPA and the BARDA that we mentioned yesterday for missions, for innovations where the basic research has been done, but you need to turn it into applications on particular well-defined missions in 1 year. You have a S-curve problem because you need to coordinate resources and researchers. And then the DARPA is a great scheme. Money comes from the ministry. That's the top-down part. They have team leaders and they elicit competing projects. And that's the bottom-up. It worked for defense and space in the 50s. It worked with BARDA with the vaccines. That's how we got all the vaccines. They had the RNA messenger technology from basic research was there. You had to turn it into mass production of vaccines in 1 year. And the BARDA, which is the equivalent of DARPA for biotech, did it. We don't have anything equivalent in Europe. Okay, there is no such thing as BARPA and BARDA in Europe. Okay, so that's the US model. So overall, I'm getting at the end. I know you, I can see you. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. You have the good side of the American model, innovation. You have the good side of the European model, protection. There are some people who believe it's either or. If you choose to be more innovative, you have to renounce protection and inclusion. If you want to be more inclusive and protective, you have to renounce being more innovative. I want to argue that at least 3 policies, flex security on the labor market, education and innovation that make and competition that make you both more innovative and more inclusive. Let me talk, and I'm done almost, okay? So flex security, I told you about the death of despair in the US. But in Denmark, when you lose your job, no problem. No effect on probability of purchasing antidepressants. No effect on probability to have a circulatory disease. No effect on mortality. Why? Because in Denmark, they invented the system. When you lose your job, you get 90% of your salary for 2 years, and the state helps you retrain and find a new job. They propose several jobs in your qualification. If you refuse more than 2, you lose your unemployment insurance. So it makes creative destruction works much better because we prepare people to rebound from one job to another. So it makes creative destruction much more efficient, and firms have the flexibility as well. But on the other hand, it protects individuals. So they found something that is both more boosted innovation in Denmark, but also protected better. I'm done. Give me 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay. So that's the first policy. The second one is education. You see here, I'm showing you the probability of inventing as a function of parents' income. And you can see that's US on recent data, US on historical data, and that's Finland. You see that you are much more likely to innovate when you have parents who earn more. That's not surprising for US. It was a bit more surprising for Finland, where education is free and high quality. Why is that? Because in fact, even in Finland, those parents who earn more, they are more educated and they transmit knowledge and aspirations to their children. That's why you still have this J-curve. Okay? And in fact, in Finland, if you control for a parental education, the curve flattens out. But there was still, you could ask, you know, they had a system in Finland which is so good and so accessible that even parental education should not matter. But in fact, the thing is that the reform in Finland of education system took place in 1970. It's in 1970 that they made the education system broadly accessible and high quality. And if you restrict attention to researchers that went through the schooling after 1970, you can see that all the individuals, compared to those who were before, the curriculum system before, you see that it increased enormously the probability of inventing for children with parents in this whole range of income. You see the education reform in Finland made a huge difference to them. So that means that when they did this reform, you see that's, so you can, why is it important? Because in our countries, we have a lot of lost Einsteins. There are many smart kids in our countries who could be innovators, but they cannot become innovators because they don't have the education or the aspiration. You see, no knowledge and aspiration. If you do a reform like Finland, you will make the economy more innovative because more people can become innovators. But at the same time, you make the economy more inclusive because more people take part in the growth process. That's again a reform that makes you both more innovative, more inclusive. And I'm done. Last thing is competition. I told you about the secular stagnation in the US and the fact that the superstar firms inhibited entry and innovation. Suppose now you reform competition policy in the US. What will be the effect? You will have more entry, more innovation, because you have more new entrants who can innovate. But we also know that entrant innovation feeds creative destruction, and that's a factor of social mobility. I didn't show that to you, because otherwise I will get a total riot. Now I'm half riot. I skipped that. But in fact, you can show that the creative destruction has the virtue of inducing social mobility, because the new replaces the old. And so if you boost competition in the US, not only you make the US economy more innovative, but you increase social mobility in the US. So at the end of the day, last slide, Schumpeter was very pessimistic because he thought that the first innovators would turn into entrenched conglomerates that would block subsequent innovation. But there is a way out. You can say the state could have competition policy and other type of policies. The problem is that the state can be bribed by private incumbents. They can bribe them. We saw in Korea. In Korea, the government was not doing what it should be doing because the conglomerates, the showballs, would bribe them into them not doing it. But that's where civil society is important, because civil society is there to check that the corruption is limited and that incumbent firms cannot bribe too much, the state. And that's why the triangle between firms, the state and civil society is key to averting the pessimistic prediction of Schumpeter. It's key also to green growth. Green growth, you need firms that do green innovation. But you need the state to redirect their innovations through carbon tax and subsidy to green innovation. And you need consumers who make a big social pressure for firms to produce and innovate greener. And my recent work shows both the role of the state and the role of civil society, particularly consumers, into redirecting firms' innovation towards green technologies. I feel now that I should rather the triangle to deliver greener and more inclusive prosperity. That's the book that Andreu mentioned, Harvard University Press, but it's also in Spain at Planeta. And that's a book forthcoming. It's researched by young people, because I have my own creative destruction. I have the young people who build and innovate on us. And that will be a big book of papers, which was based on a Festschrift conference that Andreu attended last year. And Ufuk Aksigit, John Van Reenen editors, and called The Economics of Creative Destruction. Thank you. All my apologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for this exciting and excited presentation. And once again, congratulations to your well-deserved award.
No, please. Take it. Not this one. Oh, yes.
If you have any questions for Philippe, please ask them during the coffee break. In the interest of time, we need to move on. Our next speaker is Kirsten Drotner from the University of Southern Denmark. Frontiers of Science. Which frontiers? Which science? Please. Philippe, did you bring the There.
Yeah, I had a...
Yeah.
Well done. No,
That's what we call business stealing.
yes, thank you. So if I could get the first slide, please. Thank you. So after this master performance, Philippe, it's my great pleasure to speak to you to the theme of today about frontiers of science. And I'm a media and communication scholar, so in that sense, I research one of the most important innovations in the last 300 or 400 years, which is media, everything from books and newspapers onto film, television, the radio, of course, and onto today's digital cultures. And these are some of the, as we all know, rapid innovations that societies have seen over the years. So I'll address some of the key trends and challenges in my field, and I'll do so in a moment. But I will also address some of the more general concerns when trying to identify these challenges as part of a scientific frontier, which was the task that we were asked to do today. And the reason for these concerns is this, because as I prepared my presentation, I became more and more aware that the very term frontiers of science is not a neutral or innocent term. It carries a history, and it carries some important policy context that we do well to remember if we are to make valid predictions about our respective disciplines and fields. So to start with my own field, media and communication studies, it traditionally is a field that bridges humanities and social sciences, and media and communication studies are concerned with key issues about the ways in which media operate in society, anything from newspapers, as I said, and books onto today's digital communications and mobile devices. Some scholars focus on macrostructures, such as the role played by media in shaping public opinion. Others study how particular media function for various social groups, and yet others research the ways in which media representations undergo historical transformations in terms of genre, visual style, and discourse. Digitization in all its diverse manifestations is clearly the key trend that is rapidly transforming our field. And basically, it transforms what we study. And just to give you a few examples of emerging trends here in our field, we study user safety and privacy issues with the development of artificial intelligence brought about by corporate platforms such as Meta, formerly known as Facebook, of course. We study global governance of largely unregulated platform economies, think Chinese TikTok or US-based Twitter. We study health issues resulting from the use of mobile devices and misinformation purported by social media algorithms that promote extreme expressions. In more general terms, these transformations in what we research illuminated what I think is a key challenge for my field. This is how we can integrate traditions in media and communication studies and ICT studies. The first tradition, media and communication studies, is concerned, as you can gather from what I already said, with manifest content, its representation, its organization, and various uses. And ICT studies is concerned with data, their generation and distribution through information infrastructures. And to integrate our theoretical understanding of manifest content and underlying data structures is, in my view, the overarching trend and also the key challenge that we need to tackle in the coming years. And this is not going to be an easy feat. And one reason, of course, is that it takes much closer collaboration between academic macrofields that harbor quite diverse traditions and organizations. So when reflecting on emerging trends in our disciplines, I think we need to address not only what we research, we also must be mindful of the context of conducting research, research traditions, research funding, research policies, and modes of organization. And this brings me to the key question we have been asked to address in this session, to speak about the future of our respective fields as frontiers of science. And quite frankly, the term is fairly unfamiliar to my way of reflecting about my own field, It's not a term that is often used in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And this is not just because the British term science sits uncomfortably against the more inclusive term, the continental term Wissenschaft, which is a more inclusive term. Even if we replace the term frontiers of science with the term frontiers of research, the term frontier is simply not a familiar way of thinking about scholarly development in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. As I see it, the terms frontiers of science or frontiers of research therefore merit a bit more scrutiny, because if they're not universally accepted or applied terms in the academy, this lack may hinder or obfuscate radical transformations that involve both the social sciences and humanities and the STEM areas in the challenges I've just outlined. So definitions. It's always good to consult the Oxford English Dictionary if you want to approach anything. So you can see here its definition. And as you can see, a frontier is defined as a spatial concept. It's an area beyond a known hinterland that is characterized by civilization and accepted rules and regulation. Interesting, you can also see that the OED specifies something with the USA, where the frontier is deeply aligned with popular imaginaries of conquest. And taken together, the OED definition sets up binaries between the known and the unknown, control in the hinterland and rule-based orders versus chaos and unregulated terrains, certainty versus uncertainty and shifting terrains, and of course, a very important kind of terrain where we both have cause for curiosity and concern. So when reflecting on the term frontier, I think the first insight to draw is this. Both the British and American English view frontiers as transgressions beyond a known center with accepted rules. And if we transfer this insight to the domain of science or research, some of you will probably also already have guessed where I'm getting at. In particular, of course, these definition of the frontier remind us of binaries defined by Thomas Kuhn in his book from 1962, where he described what he called normal science, a general agreement about what counts as valid scientific problems and how to solve them. And in normal science, there's fairly consensus about the substance and the rules and limitations of a known field among its actors. And when normal science is unable to resolve particular problems within the given framework of understanding, then a disruption may occur through a paradigm shift. And we've just seen Philippe's excellent example of how that can be done. Importantly, a paradigm shift doesn't merely change the course of development in a particular area, it transforms its foundation, and therefore also Kuhn termed it a scientific revolution. And of course, much ink has been spilled over the years in debating the validity of Kuhn's approach. Today, my more modest question is this really how academic disciplines and fields operate and develop? And one way to begin to answer that question is to begin to see who uses the term and how is it used. So the term frontiers of science and frontiers of research, they're very widely recognized in the STEM areas. This is easily evidenced by the number of scientific journals encompassing those names. And I just show you two websites here. One is Frontiers Media, which is an umbrella for 177 open access journals with titles all starting with Frontiers in and then something. Another big player is Frontiers Journals, which you also see up there, which is an umbrella for 33 journals. It's based in China. And again, primarily in the STEM areas. The prevalence of such journals is testimony to the term frontier being a sign of organizational acceptance, if not universal academic recognition. Apart from journals, I think we can see frontiers of science or frontiers of research being mostly used by research funding bodies. And one example we could take is from Canada, the New Frontiers in Research Fund, which was launched in 2018, and I just quote here from their website, as you can see up on the screen. And you can see in the quote that the aim of the research fund is to balance its focus on research into the unknown with radically impactful results. They should be game-changing. A bit south of the border, we may go to the National Science Foundation, which since 2015, in its engineering section, has a signature initiative called the Emerging Frontiers in Research and Innovation Program. Again, I quote on the screen from their description of the aim of the program, and you can know a combined focus on transformative ideas and societal impact. Let's move a bit closer to home, the ERC. Everybody's darling. Earlier this year, the ERC published an interesting report called Mapping ERC Frontier Research. And it was based on an analysis through a detailed classification system of all ERC projects funded during the entire Horizon 2020 framework program. And the report charts trends in the ERC 3 main domains, plus the synergy grant, as you can see on the screen. Interestingly, in addition to this, the report also documents how the ERC grants have impacted 3 key policy areas: a Europe fit for the digital age, the European Green Deal, and EU for health. Why does the ERC publish such a report, I asked myself. And to answer this, I think we can get an indication by the text that accompanies a table mapping how, as you can see above, ERC frontier research is relevant for European Commission policy areas. And I don't want to list everything here, but I think it's evident from the text on the top that the ERC walks on a tightrope here. They need to be true to their fundamental principle about funding researcher-led and curiosity-driven research, but apparently also needing to document why public funding should go into this. And interestingly, I think the term frontier research seemed to capture this balance. And this terminology is certainly not new to the ERC. We can remind ourselves that a key policy document paving the way for the very formation of the ERC was a high-level expert group report named Frontier Research, the European Challenge from 2005, as you can see. And the report usefully characterized frontier research along familiar fault lines. Frontier research creates breakthroughs, it said it is risky and often transgresses disciplinary boundaries. And interestingly, the report also provided a policy argument, which I've listed on the screen. With frontier research, researchers may well be concerned with both new knowledge about the world and with generating potentially useful knowledge at the same time. Again, you can see here an attempt to balance two aims. In 2005, when this report was issued, the term frontier may have been used to counter arguments about what drives innovation, or research innovation, I should say, in view of what Philippe just told us, arguments that were then found within the strategic and innovation pillars of existing framework programs. Also, we may note that there was then still a focus on science and technology that you can see at the end of the quote up there. The ERC has certainly come a long way since then. I think the ERC has proved absolutely fundamental as a prime funding instrument in the European research area. And I think often underrated is the role that ERC plays back at international levels. It's a way of rethinking what research is for. It's a way of regenerating discourses about what scholarship is for in the wider field of the public good. So I think this national kind of payback is important to remember. And today there's, of course, little need to argue against binaries between basic and applied research as they needed to do in 2005. Yet, as we have seen, the indication persists that pioneer research is impactful and relevant. So I think the second insight that we can cull from this brief and selective view of who uses the term frontier in the academy and how is it used is that the concept is not an intrinsic concept describing scholarly practices, and certainly not a term that is applied in all fields. Rather, it's an extrinsic concept mostly applied by journals and research funding organizations. And importantly, as you can see from what I've said, it harbors a dilemma, maybe even a paradox, between curiosity-driven and researcher-led research and problem-based or challenge-based research. And to understand why this dilemma exists when we talk about frontier research, we need to go back in history. We need to go back to the end of World War II, to Vannevar Bush, who in July of 1945 published Science, the Endless Frontier again, and it's often credited, this report, as the foundation of the expansion of US science after World War II. Of course, Vannevar Bush was an MIT engineer who had advised President Roosevelt on science during the war when Bush directed the early stages of the Manhattan Project, as most of you will be familiar with. The report became a blueprint for science policy in the USA, with Bush masterminding the formation of the National Science Foundation. Yet the function of the term frontier has shifted over the years. At first, it was used as an argument for supporting science as a driver of societal development for the common good. You can see up here the quote, health, prosperity, and security. And later the term became used, the term frontier, as a very successful mechanism to prioritize more risky forms of science. And indeed, this shift, I think, may be seen as an indication of the success of science, because science has really delivered a range of radical innovations to a point when it may become increasingly difficult to come up with more radical innovations, particularly in highly competitive funding environments that tend to prioritize safe projects, short-term results, and visible results. And here the term frontier promises that funding fussy, high-risk research is a means of accelerating much-needed radical research innovations. The increasing success since 1945 of applying the term frontier as a lever of research funding has been, I think, importantly to note, also accompanied by increasing criticism. And I just show you two of the more pronounced critics here. And it's important to note that the criticism about using the term frontier to describe research is particularly pronounced with scholars in the US. And the critics argue that the term frontier creates an image of science as a battle and the scientist as a lone, male, white cowboy. And such an image, they claim, blanks out important dimensions of research such as collaboration, interdisciplinarity, and diversity measures as ways of harnessing talent and promoting scientific excellence, many important aspects that we have also been discussing today and yesterday here. The critique in the USA must be understood in light of how the frontier term has operated in the US. It's a key metaphor in American cultural and social life, and it's not a coincidence that the Oxford English Dictionary marked out a particular definition that is relevant for the USA. So up here, I just have listed just a few examples, and you may see here John Wayne's New Frontier, a film from 1935 that another John, Kennedy, picked up the title as his political slogan when he ran for president in 1960. He also promised to create the USA as a new frontier. And some of you may also recognize Star Trek up here, which of course is famous, the hugely popular science fiction series, popular for the slogan, Space, the Final Frontier, because every single episode for the 3 years that it ran said, it started at each episode, Space, the Final Frontier, to boldly go where no man has gone before. So it's no wonder it became so popular. It's important to note that in other parts of the world, the term frontier harbors less symbolic baggage than in the USA. So we should be cautious, I think, to generalize the criticisms that I outlined here in terms of research. Indeed, the persistent and prevalent use of the term frontier also in the European research area may have much more pragmatic reasons, as I indicated earlier. It may be based on a need to legitimate curiosity-driven research in policy contexts that traditionally prioritize agenda-driven research. So the third insight we may gain is that the term frontier is far from a neutral term, and I think we should use it with caution if used at all. Indeed, as judged from the vantage point of the social sciences and humanities, I believe the term divides more than it unites in terms of accelerating interdisciplinary interaction. And I would at any time prefer the ERC to be true and steadfast in retaining curiosity-driven, researcher-led or similar terms as their points of reference. So with these general caveats in mind about the policy implications of the term frontier, let me return back to my own field of research, and let me return and conclude by getting back to what I defined earlier as a major challenge in my own field, namely the integration of research on data and information infrastructures, often the hidden parts, and on communicative content and use. And I think it's apt to return with that challenge again to Vannevar Bush, for he was not merely a chief hero or a chief villain, according to one's policy perspectives. He was also, as many of you will know, a pioneer of computer science. And in July 1945, the very same month that he published Science, the Endless Frontier, he also published a small article, As We May Think, in the journal The Atlantic. It's a short article, but it had very long-ranging implications, because here Bush described his invention of what he called a memex. It's a technology, it's a bit strange when you look at the image there. It's a technology that could store vast amounts of information and allow for users to create associative links between them. And the memex paved the way for what we now know as hypertext, the World Wide Web, and even speech recognition. So in theoretical terms, Bush helped transform thinking about data, and I think this is the important message from my own field to take home. Changing thinking about data from isolated units of information to resources of human communication and knowledge. And in that way, he pioneered the very integration of hidden data infrastructures and manifest content and use. And I think we still need to reap the benefits of these profound insights. And as you may have guessed, I think we can do so without recourse to frontier research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, for this excellent presentation. I think we have time for one or two short questions, if there is any.
Okay.
Yes, over there. Please.
Yes, thank you. There was a very interesting talk. I have a question about maybe the negative aspects that you mentioned about the use of frontiers. And one of it is that we, of course, want to push the boundaries and expand our knowledge, but I think that this leaves us vulnerable to lack of replicability, right? So if we only want to always drive the research that's novel and that always wants to discover something more, then there is no space for rigid, replicable studies because they're just not novel enough. So I always am wondering about this balance, and I wonder what's your opinion on that?
That's a very good question. I think it also it very much speaks to different validity claims in different disciplines, because of course, as you rightly point out, replicability cannot be applied in all sciences. And so I think it's in that sense, frontier research is more inclusive in focusing on explorative science, on high-risk science, and going into the unknown. But of course, some sciences would then have the problem as you describe it, but not all sciences.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Jean-Marie Tarascon from Collège de France, smarter batteries via the help of sensing and self-healing functionalities. Please.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here. You know, I listened to wonderful talks about economics. I listened to a beautiful talk about frontier. And I think I am going to be a little different. I will tell you more or less what are the frontier of science, what is around the corner. But in my case, I'm going to show you an example. and then decide if what I present you is frontier or not. I don't know. I'll let you. You can bet. So what I would like to do today, as a matter of fact, is talking about this issue, which could have fit as well in the symposium this morning, dealing with sustainability. So what I would like to do is more or less to present type of research that has been conducted under ERC and under the Balzan Prize, the reason why I am here. So this is more or less regarding smarter batteries with the help of sensing and INSEAD functionality. So the talk will be oriented as follows. I will tell you more or less what is really the energy storage contest, and then I will discuss the early science and innovation behind this frontier of smart batteries. And for me, frontier is nothing else that is driven by a dream. And then I will conclude in the perspective to market of this kind of advanced frontier. So first, as I mentioned today, we have been talking about renewable energies as making the headlines in the newspaper, simply because in this case, this is a great hope in order to go around the fossil fuel incident. So John White, all newspapers are making kind of headline about sustainability and different means to do it, either using wind farm or photovoltaic farms. But when you look at this type of energy, there, as you can see, intermittent, which means that we need, in this case, to smooth the power of these different type of energies, and to do so, you need storage. And to do storage, what I'm going to do here, I will not talk about hydro pumping. I will talk here in the first part of electrochemical storage, where in this case, you are kind of converting what I will call chemical energy into electrical energy. And the device that you all know to do this are what we call the batteries. And this type of batteries have been around for a long time, as clearly indicated here. So what are the frontiers here? You can see you have several technologies, and there is a one that is the one that you are all using nowadays, which is the lithium-ion technology. And this is certainly the biggest advance of the last century in electrochemistry. And this is witnessed by the allocation of the Nobel Prize in 2019 to these three gentlemen that were the pioneers into this field. So this is John Godinoff, Ten Whittingham, and Akira Yoshino. So what is the type of batteries that you are using today? This is nothing else than this kind of electrochemical device, which is more or less typical of all electrochemical devices, where you have electrodes that are really immersed into a liquid electrolyte. And what you are looking and what you are doing when you are placing a phone call, you are nothing else than really measuring the voltage as function of capacity, and the surface below this curve is what is going to define how long you are going to be talking at your phone and so on. And to really design better system in this case, we use a very simple equation that is really the product of voltage by capacity, where the voltage is nothing else than the output voltage of the battery that you are measuring, and the capacity is nothing else than the number of vacancies that you have in electron materials. And what is very important in terms of sustainability reason, when you are really designing new device, is energy efficiency. For the simple reason that you don't want to take too much energy or more energy to recharge your battery that you gain when you discharge. So you want this difference to be relatively small. So this is more or less a type of system that we have been working on. But in the field of batteries, and going back to economics maybe, I think there is a guy that really drove the field, and he's not a scientist, or he's maybe a scientist, but not a chemist for sure, is this guy, Elon Musk. And it is because of Elon Musk today that we have this kind of boom that we are knowing in the field of electrical transportation. Because in 2015, Elon Musk said that theoretically every human being on the Earth should have enough energy when he wanted and at low price. So John White, he really defined this bulk gigafactory and predict that the price of the lithium-ion should drop drastically. And this happened because in 10 years, it has been dropped by 10 times. And even expected to. And this has created, I will say, the revolution that we are knowing today in the field of electric transportation, as indicated here on this graph, where you see the number of EV models that are kind of growing like hell, And you can see the numbers are kind of, I will say, vertiginous in terms of millions of vehicles that you could have, as well as for grid applications. And of course, when you see this spectacular advance, you need, in this case, to cope with such demand. And you don't write, at the European level now, you have a huge amount of effort to build this kind of a gigafactory that are growing like wildfire in Europe. And you can see all these companies trying to get into the market. So this means that Europe want to take decision and want, in this case, to play a big game in the future of the battery market and reach about 17 gigawatt hour, and we are expecting, or Europe is expecting, to get about 19%. And this is a very interesting point here. Again, economically speaking, I think we can do this, but you need to realize that today we are importing 98% of our raw materials and 100% of the assembling parts. So it means that when we are talking about sovereignty of Europe, you need to question this. So this is more or less what I want to show you, more or less, the general situation. Now the question that you may ask is, how long a lithium-ion battery will last? And here, this is our data that has been taken by a colleague where you are looking here at the performance of these batteries. To make the story shorter, you can see that nowadays, lithium-ion batteries can last from 3 million kilometers for about 25 years. And even if you are using them under normal conditions, we can even talk about now about the century battery. So you can see that we have made a huge amount of progress in the lifetime of batteries. But of course, here there is a caveat where we are looking at a single cell. And when you are using your EV, you are not looking at a single cell, but at multiple cells. And this is more or less where now I am going to show you how we have been pushing the frontier. Indeed, what is very important, and the community has been very successful until now, to understand what's going on at the cell level in terms of all degradation mechanism and so on, even in looking at this, what we call in our jargon, this SCI, which governs the lifetime of the batteries. However, there has been a big gap between the cell and the module, means how you are going to use this stuff in an electric vehicle. So 4 or 5 years ago, we are wondering, how to close this gap and how to anticipate and what kind of system we need to develop to do this. Why? Because this is very important nowadays, because economically speaking and sustainability-wise, you want to give each battery a second life. Second, you really want to get the best efficacy of your battery and electric vehicles. And third, you have a large amount of application dealing now with what we call from the grid to the vehicles, where in this case, you want to use more or less a car when you never use it in order to pilot the renewable energy for intermittency. So you want to do this. Now there is no mystery. We need to have better reliability of the batteries. And the idea that we have about 4 or 5 years ago was, can we get inspiration from the field of medicine? And in this case, can we put some optical fiber within our batteries in order to know finally what is really is a lifetime, is penability, and so on. So this is more or less what I'm going to show you now, how this kind of field that was not known at all 4 years ago is kind of moving. So of course, if you look at the issue of sensing, it has been studied in the case of battery for a long time, but no one thought, or at least succeeded, in putting this kind of sensor inside the battery, like when you have a surgery in the hospital, we put a fiber in order to know what is going on. So what we decide is we are going to use exactly the same thing as in medicine, means optical fiber, in order more or less to spy what's going on into the electrochemical cell. And optical fiber, as you know, are very well known. You are using this stuff for data communications. And what we have been doing here, we want to do it into a battery because it's very small, tiny. Secondly, electronic insulated, which is perfect for a battery and so on. So this is more or less what we have decided to do. And what we have decided is to put this kind of optical fiber in which you inscribe what we call this FBG sensor. The sensor, very simply, there is nothing else than a mirror with respect to specific light wavelength. And what you are looking here is now, if the temperature of your cell change, you can see this wavelength does change. So we can now monitor the change in temperature within the battery. So the way you do this, you inject a fiber into the battery, and you can see that this doesn't affect at all the performance and cycling. So what you get from here, you get very important information, because now you can see I can have access to the gradient temperature between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell, and then I can use multiplexing, and I can really obtain, in this case, a temperature imaging of the battery as indicated here. So I can go one step further. I can even, in this case, do optical calorimetry, where I here place this different sensor as indicated here, and I can from here get all the information of the heat transfer between the cell and the outside. And this is, of course, sorry, what am I doing here? This is, of course, very important in order to design efficient cooling system and so on. So this is more or less what we can have in terms of practical system. Then, very important is how to control this kind of SCI that I mentioned to you, which governs the battery lifetime, as clearly indicated here. And there is no way all this stuff is done by field trial approach. And you can see now, if I put my sensor inside, when I look at function of temperature, I get this kind of thermal events. And these thermal events, namely the SCI, is associated to the heat. This heat, I can also have the associated pressure, and you can find that indeed, now, if I have a chemical reaction, I have, of course, heat that change, as well as pressure. And I can really now know how this magic SCI is going to form within the cell. And this has drastic implication in the term of formatting your batteries or finding what are the best electrolytes for this. And when you look here, you look case of sodium ion cell, where you can see here the famous SCI and CI, and we can, by measuring this heat, both at the positive and negative electrode, determine, finally, what are the best ingredient and the best electrolyte. And what you are looking here, this electrolyte, is exactly what you have in your battery today, where it is a mixture of chemical components, but you need to adjust them in order to have the proper function. So this is what we can do. We can even go one step further, and in this case, use the same type of sensor, which now not to detect temperature, but you can also detect the strength. And you know what when these batteries are operating, the volume of the positive and negative electrode does change. And now we can follow it, and we can follow what is happening within the cell. And what you are looking here is just the way that an electrode does operate, and you can see the large change in volume. And now we can track this large change by putting fiber inside, and you can see here that we are distinguishing between kind of micro or nano silicon, and we can know now what is the stress release when you are going to inject extra cations into this kind of thing. So this is more or less all we can do. Now, I just show you more or less about the thermal parameters, and of course what is important is what is the chemistry and what are the molecules. And here, we can really do, if you want to use optical fiber to look at the chemistry, you are obliged to leave the light to sense the outside. Reason why you can do it by just tilting, in this case, the black sensor as indicated here, and you call this tilted fiber grad sensor. And when you do this, you can now measure the change and the refractive index of electrolyte, and this is more or less what you see it in a sucrose solution. You can do it in a battery, and you can see, as indicated here, where you can see that the Ri is changing as you are daily moving the concentration. So we can now access to this kind of change environment, just the refractive index. But this is not enough. Can we know now the nature of the molecules that you are forming during this reaction? And here I think this is more or less where the innovation is coming from, where in this case we decide why we don't use this evanescent wave, along the fiber to detect which molecule do form. And of course, we can do this. But if you do this, this is more or less a kind of wavelength spectrum. And when you work with a silica fiber, what you have in telecommunication, you transmit only at 1.5 to 3 microns. And there is no way that you are going to get the vibration of the molecules. So, in this case, we need really to widen your spectrum to obtain the higher spectrum. And what we have done here is really, and I think this is another part of pushing the frontier, where we have really changed the type of fiber and move to chalcogenide fiber, where now we open widely the spectrum in which we can work. And indeed, doing so, we are able, as you can see now, to see perfectly what's going on in life within your cell, and you can detect all the species that are forming. Just a simple example, I told you what we are putting additives. We want to know more or less when they decompose, at which potential, and so on. And now we can, with this, we put this additive, vinylene carbonate. We look at the carbonyl group. We have, in this case, all the IR spectra. And then we monitor the voltage, and we see the SEI formation. And you can see, we can see when this additive is going to act into the battery and trigger side reaction. So this is more or less what we can do. And we can even go one step further. We can really now put our fiber into the electrode, and we are going to sense now, as you can see here, a case of lithium phosphate, the kind of concentration, because we are looking here at the vibration mode of these PO4 units, and you can see when we put lithium in and lithium out, we are modifying, and we can really follow, monitor this change. And this enables us to have access to the state of charge and state of health of the battery. So this is more or less all what you can do. To kind of summarize here what I show you, more or less this is what we have been doing now by launching this new area where we can really control what's going on at the molecule level, at the particle level, at the electron level, at the cell level, and of course at the system level, and I will touch a point on it. Now, this is half of the story, because, you know, it's the same thing, going back to my image of going to the hospital. If you go to the hospital and it's by diagnostic, they find a tumor, automatically they need to repair it. So in white, in this case, we are also doing self-healing. And when we do self-healing, or when we are talking about selectivity of cations through a membrane, in this case, we just need to get inspirations once again from the nature. And what I am showing you here is nothing else than a membrane that is going to transport ion between the intracellular and extracellular medium. And what is very interesting here, if you look at the assembly of this membrane, is made of lipid molecules that are assembled at the atomic level by supramolecular interaction. So what we are doing here, we are using cyclodextrin as a supramolecular agent in order to design membrane to use temperature as a stimulus to capture different type of ions and so on. So this is more or less what we are doing. So what is our dream, where we are, and what is coming around the corner? In this case, just want to show you that in 10 years from now, battery, when you will be using, you will not have only two positive and negative electrons, but you will have an analytical output where we can detect all the metrics, all the observable, in order to control the lifetime of the battery. This, of course, is going to be related to advanced battery system, management system, and the large amount of data is going to be handled, trained by artificial intelligence. Okay? And doing so, we are going to get or design or have an electronic passport of your battery. And this electronic passport will enable you to have a better use of the system, a better predictability, multiply the lifetime, enhance the safety, and of course, the durability. And all this kind of stuff is a dream, because if you look at the European level, if you look at the European directive for the batteries and the future years, you can see that theoretically, in January 2027, each battery should have an electronic passport. So this is more or less kind of ongoing research, and the time that we need to implement this stuff will certainly take more time. So now the question is this a dream, and what are the chances to transfer into a real product and to a technology? So here, of course, there is a serious practical challenge. Number one, we need to have a pack integration, which means that we need to have a kind of miniaturized source. We need to have interconnections, and we need to treat data. So automatically, if you want to inject this stuff into a module, we want to have wireless systems. And here I think we are very lucky because we are taking advantages of parallel research presently in different research fields. In the field of medicine, people now are developing this FBG sensor to treat heart disease and so on. In aviation, here again, they try to develop this kind of FBGs to put in the cockpit and so on. So they have a huge experience in treating the data. And even right, by doing so, nowadays, this is more or less the type of interrogator that is about, you can see, the size of 3 or 4 centimeters that we can use and which 2 channels, and using multiplexing, we can control here about 40 FBG sensors. So how we are going to do this, and we are doing it today, this is more or less our first demonstration, in which we take a module here, as you can see, and you are nearly all the FBGs that are going nearly to go around the cells, determine temperature, and determine strength. And all is made possible because, again, we need to treat data, and in this case, we have a connection with a company that is well known in aeronautics, that is Safran, that is helping us how to treat the data and try finally to bring them to board. So this is more or less what I want to show you today, how we start from the classical idea, or we really have a vision, a dream of what should be really the batteries in the future, and in 4 or 5 years, thanks to the funding of European level, as well as the funding of the Balzan Prize, we were able to bring this dream to a near reality. And with this, I would like to conclude it by thanking all the people that have daily work on this project, and I want to thank you all. And you can tell me if this stuff is pushing the frontier or not, I don't know, but tell me.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie, for this very interesting question. We have time for 1 or 2 short questions. Maybe I can start them myself. So the current batteries, as you mentioned, contains lithium ions, and lithium is sort of scarce. So do you see alternatives in the future, not using rare metals?
Oh, okay. Yes, very good point, indeed, because myself, we create a company that develops sodium ion. And sodium ion is the same kind of chemistry with more abundance of sodium. But, of course, the sodium ion battery will be not as competitive with lithium ion in terms of energy density. It will be a little lower. Therefore, grid application and so on will be fine.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. A terrific presentation, terrific research. I just want to ask one follow-up, literally, because I'm curious what implications you anticipate for these developments for the recyclability of battery materials when ultimately they do pass any usable lifetime.
Okay, very good point. I think, the main motivation of this work was to double the cycle life. And I think it's more or less like retirement. When you want to retire a person, you need to know the degree of penability. And if you really, follow the history of the battery, you know more or less what type of application you can really give to this battery. Because if you take battery from car when you have a kind of a very harsh driver, definitively the battery will not last more than 10 or 15 years. So in this case, you cannot really use it for a second life for grid application. So this will enable more or less to do more or less a selection for the type of batteries, because each battery will have their own story. So you just need as a data, and you know more or less what the amount of capacity left and so on.
Thank you very much. We break now for coffee. Please be back again at 1500.